Dear listeners, I am so excited to be back today with you and to see you, and just excited once again. Really, you would think that after all these episodes that I might be done having something to say. Well, I don't. I'm not. I sometimes find myself wanting to do my own podcast, and sometimes I find these amazing guests, and that's what I have today. Welcome, Danielle Cobo, to our guest.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Well, the reason that you're on, I'm just going to be upfront. The reason you're on this show is because the title of your book struck me in my face, called Unstoppable Grit. And as all my listeners know, that was my mantra when I was first retiring. And as I stepped into a new life, I gave myself the hashtag of badass woman with a purpose, grace, and grit. And that title was just so at home for me. So let's start by telling our listeners a little bit about you, what you do for a living and a career, and about your family. And I know I heard a son in the background, so I know that you have a son at least. And let's hone them into on who you are.
Who I am. Well, I started my career in sales. I spent 15 years in the medical sales industry, where I was most recently a leader for a Fortune 500 organization. I led a sales team. And after leaving corporate, during the Great Resignation, like many people did, I ventured off and started to do speaking full time in career and business coaching. And now I do that full time, in addition to launching the book that I just launched. And I am a mother to 6-year-old twin boys. Oh, and I'm also a military spouse.
So you have a full-time life aside from your actual career. That's wonderful.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm a mom to 6-year-old twin boys, and I like to say that they have more energy than a squirrel on a triple espresso, because at any given moment we are doing obstacle courses in our house to try to burn out some of that energy.
I can relate to that. I had 2 boys. They weren't twins, but they were very close to each other, and keeping them active and involved was something. And twins are something different, very special kind of thing. Do you find them still having their own personalities, or are they kind of more similar than you think?
They're two different kids that just happen to be born at the same time. They could not be more different. And I would say the best way to describe it is, one of my boys will sit there and he's 6 years old, and he will build a 9+ Lego and sit there for hours and study the instructions and build this beautiful Lego. My other son wants him to build the Legos for him so that he can go and destroy them.
Okay.
Yeah. My other son is one of those kids where he gets dressed up and he goes, "Mommy, I want you to introduce me." I said, "Okay." So he goes behind the curtains, and I go, "Ladies and gentlemen, introducing and starring of the show, Jamison Cobo." And he pops up behind the curtains and he does his country line dancing. That is the best way to describe personality differences between my 2 kids.
Wow. They are very different. But, you hear about identical twins and how much they are in sync with each other, kind of spiritually and emotionally, even though their personalities obviously are very different. Do you see any likenesses in that? Do you see that to be true?
Yeah. So ours are fraternal. They're not identical. They're similar in the sense of how any siblings would be similar. They're both pretty outgoing. They are both just happy-go-lucky kids. Unfortunately, get sick all the time. So yes, that's why one of them is homesick. But they're similar in the sense of they're brothers, but they're so different. One loves to eat. One will try everything. We go to a restaurant and I've got a 6-year-old who's eating oysters and steak and beef carpaccio, and he'll try anything. My other one, I can't even get him to eat mac and cheese. He's so picky.
Okay.
So they're just so different on every level, but they complement each other very, very well.
I love that. So to move from marketing into the field that you're in now is is a little bit of a jump, but really I've interviewed so many women that it's not such a big jump. That suddenly during the Great Resignation, there was that time of introspection where you got to look and say, wow, I'm good at marketing, but is it really my calling? Does it grab my soul and get me up every single day? And so as you decided what this other career was going to be like, what drew you to being a life coach and to being, talking about health and wellness and to talking about this concept of grit? What drew you to that?
Well, I had no intentions of starting a business. So it's interesting now being a business owner and doing what I'm doing now. If you would have asked me if I'd be doing this 3 years ago, I would have said absolutely not. What transpired, I had 4 events that transpired within a 6-month period that radically changed my life professionally and personally. The first one was my husband had served a year deployment in Iraq. So when in 2019, he was gone for an entire year. When he left, our twins were 1.5 years old. So they were learning their first words. They were learning to walk. They were still eating out of high chairs. And then all of a sudden he comes home and they're sleeping in toddler beds and they're sitting at the dinner table in regular chairs and they're formulating their complete sentences and they've got opinions. And he went from this war zone of Iraq and fighting in Iraq to this temper tantrums at home. And that shift was very different for us. We really we really struggled in the beginning with coming together as a united unit, as a united family, because we were two very different. We had grown a lot in different ways when he was deployed. And so when we came back together, that was our first major shift in 2020. The second one was March 8th. I learned the devastating news that my mom had taken her life. And it was completely unexpected. I was devastated. I couldn't imagine that somebody was in so much pain that the only solution they saw in their head was to take their life. And so as I was coping and trying to comprehend that my mom was no longer going to be here on earth, that a week later, the global pandemic hit, March 13th. That's when the world had shut down. So I wasn't even able to go home and take care of her things. I wasn't able to go through her things, have any closure towards that. So it was as though like my life at home with my immediate family unit between my husband and my kids was shifting. My extended with my mom, losing her. Then all of a sudden the world is shifting. Yeah. And then the fourth event that took place was the company that I was with for 7 years had been acquired by another organization. And there was a very, very toxic employee that was on my team, and I did not feel supported by my organization. Ultimately, I ended up leaving the organization after 7 years. And I was one of those individuals who had tied my identity to the company that I had worked with, to the job title that I had, to the salary that I had earned. And so everything about my life had drastically changed, and I felt lost and I felt confused. And what ended up being this journey of self-reflection and rebuilding of who I wanted to be as a person, how I wanted to show up, what ended up being this, I'm going to go on LinkedIn and I'm going to start developing my brand so I can attract job opportunities. I ended up posting all these inspiring posts and people started to reach out to me for coaching. So a lot of career coaching, a lot of how do I get a job? How do I excel in sales? I know you've got a sales background. I want to earn President's Club. How did you do it? Then it transitioned into people saying, well, you left corporate. And where I'm at now is people are saying, you left corporate. You built a business. I want to do the same thing. And so it just kind of evolved from there. But if you would have asked me 3.5 years ago, where are you going to be 3 years from now? I thought I was going to be working for that same company.
Wow. So, but one thing you did, which is really impressive, is that a lot of people feel that pull, but fear stands in their way of stepping into it, into that fullness that I kind of get from that you're experiencing now compared to your corporate job. So how do you think people overcome that fear to step in to where they're fulfilling this inner joy that they have?
Yeah, I think that the fear of the unknown is a common roadblock that we run into whenever it comes to us pursuing our goals or looking at what that next step is in our life. And it's one of the roadblocks that I talk about in the book, Unstoppable Grit. The fear of the unknown is this, we're so much of what we want in life is this certainty of this plan in place. But the reality is, as much as we think that we know what the future is going to be based off of the plan that we've implemented or the path that we're creating, at any given moment, it could change. And so instead of looking at our life and saying, well, what do I want to do when I grow up? Or what do I want to do in my career? I get to think about, like, who do I want to be? What is the most fulfilling about my career? And how do I get to do that on a consistent basis? Because a lot of times in life, one of the reasons why we get burnt out, we get overwhelmed, we get stressed out is because it's a lack of passion and purpose in what we're doing.
I couldn't agree more. That lack of passion and purpose leads us to that worst of all emotions, which is regret. And I have a thing against regret, because regret, you can do nothing about it. When you get to the end of your life and you say, oh, I regret that I didn't do this, and I regret that you didn't do that. For me, at my age, I spend every day looking at what's out in front of me, so that I never get there and say, gee, if I wish I'd had the courage to do this, to step in. I think that's what makes you really profoundly qualified to speak on this concept of transformation, because you went through it yourself. You transformed yourself. And that's kind of what you're doing now. I looked on your website and it says Ignite Transformation. Okay, so let's talk about that. I have about 85% women listeners, and they're in that range of age 30 to 60, still career women. I have 15% wonderful men, and we love them because they're also realizing that everything we talk about is universal. However, that some of these things are geared toward women. So in thinking about that age group and thinking about really wanting to have the courage to step in as you did and transform their life to a level that they're never going to have regret, what are the first steps for them?
Ooh. So one of the exercises that I take people through is called the legacy exercise. And I believe that the higher level of self-awareness that we have about ourselves, the happier, more fulfilled that we're going to be. The easier it's going to be to overcome roadblocks when we have a high level of self-awareness of what the roadblocks are and what ultimately our goals are for the future. The legacy exercise is something that I took out of when my mom, when she had passed, and I started to write her obituary. And I started to think about, gosh, I'm writing this obituary for her. Am I saying the right things? Is she going to be happy with the words that I'm putting into this obituary? And then I started to think about, well, when my time comes, what are people going to say about me? And it became this self-reflective journey of thinking about, how do I want to show up in this world? And so what I started to do is I went on Facebook in a very vulnerable moment. I went on Facebook and I was at this point where I had just left the company. I was so lost. I was so confused. I was having panic attacks. I was second guessing myself all the time. And I was like, I just don't know what is it about me that people dislike? Like, how am I showing up in this world? And so I went on Facebook and I said, if there's 3 words to describe me, what would it be? And people started to flood in with the comments: empowering, inspiring, driven, motivated, gritty, resilient, encouraging, kind, all these wonderful words that people were describing me. But it was so interesting because I didn't see that in myself. I didn't understand it. And so I took all these words and I made a word cloud out of them. And so it's something that I created this word cloud. So if there's words that people repetitively said, like let's say there's 3 different people that said the same word, those words show up bigger on the word cloud than some of the words that are just said single. But it's this beautiful piece of art that you can look at. So I would encourage people, the first step to do is find out how other people perceive you, because a lot of times we get so caught in the negative in our own brain of the shortcomings we think that we have, that we don't think of the strengths of what we have. And that's what other people see in us. And so go on Facebook, ask that question in a very vulnerable moment, and then take those words, create a word cloud. And anytime that you are experiencing doubt or frustration, or you just don't see the beauty inside of you, look at that word cloud. And then the second step that I did was I wrote an obituary from the perspective of a colleague and a perspective of a family member, using the words that people had used to describe me. And I call it the legacy exercise, because ultimately what came out of it is I started to think of, instead of thinking about what do I want to do with this next step in my life, I started to think about, how do I want to show up in this world? How do I want to make an impact in this world? How do I want to make a difference in this world? How do I want to have a lasting legacy for my kids? What are they going to say about me when it comes to, I want them to not remember me based off of the job title I had, the income that I was making, but more or less, I could go to my mom for anything and I know that she would be there for me. She supported me. She loved me unconditionally. She was always there to cheer me on. Those are the things that I want people want my kids to say about me. So when I think about priority wise and how am I going to prioritize what's important to me in my life, I go back to that legacy exercise. And anytime I'm making a decision career wise, personally, professionally, does it align with the legacy that I want to leave?
You know, I think this exercise with doing a word board is like phenomenal. So that part I totally am on the page with. But you did it in such, when you ask those things on Facebook, as you and I both know, sometimes there are those people who ask those things and you scroll by it. It's the energy about the post and the ask. But you used a very key word for me, and that was that you asked in vulnerability. That you opened up your heart and you wanted to know. And sometimes I'm sure that people also shared some things like, sometimes you question yourself, or that kind of thing, you know what I mean? But not just that 100%, I want to hear only good things. So if you don't have anything good to say, just keep your mouth shut. I want to know how people think about me, honestly. And I love that you asked that in vulnerability. And when I see someone on Facebook who asks that, and the energy is being vulnerable, I step in and bind up and support and give them all those beautiful, juicy words that they really want and need to hear at that moment in their life. And the second thing is that you did something with it then. You didn't just get your word board and say, okay, well, aren't I a fabulous person? But you actually put it to use, and you used it in writing your mom's obituary and then in designing your life. I love that. You know, with your title of your book being Unstoppable Grit, and you used 2 words in this thing that people thought you were, gritty, and that you had resilience. Of course, those 2 words just pop out at me because I love those 2 words. What do you see the difference in those 2 words? Are they the same? Are they different? And how do we develop those?
Yeah, so I believe that there are similarities to them, but differences between them. So Angela Duckworth did her TED Talk and she wrote the book Grit. And she did a lot of research behind grit. And her definition of grit is passion and perseverance towards long-term goals. So to be gritty is to be super clear on what you want and have the passion and the perseverance to keep going for it. Resilience is the ability to get back up when setbacks occur. So it's that willingness to take action afterwards. So they complement each other very well, but there's a little differences between the 2 of them.
I agree with that. They are very different. And, for me, I always think of grit is what you have to pull up from inside of you to take that next step and just to keep your nose to the grindstone until it's a bloody mess. And then, you move on. And the gift of grit is resilience. You build this over time. I climbed Kilimanjaro at age 66. And to be able to do that required all the grit that I had built in my life. But every time when I thought, okay, I wonder if they can get a helicopter up here, and can I get off this mountain? I would, but my resilience, that gift that I had built over the years, moved me on every single day. So as you look at those two topics, do you think one comes before the other? And how do people step in to building that in their own lives?
I think you said it beautifully when you said that resilience is a gift that comes out of grit.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And I think grit sometimes comes first because resilience is this, you're radiating, I'm a resilient person. But before that, you don't always radiate resilience. You radiate, I'm going to stick with them. I'm going to get this done. And I'm not going to move off the box. But how would you say, I know how I built it in my own life. How would you say you have built grit?
I would say that grit was modeled for me. It was nurtured in me, and it was innate within me. And what I mean by that, it was modeled for me by my mom. My mom and dad divorced when I was 2.5 years old. And she was, when I was 5 years old, she was a single mom. She was going to school full time to get her bachelor's degree, and she was serving at a restaurant. And I saw my mom go from us living in a 1-bedroom apartment where my bed was in the living room, and most nights we ate mac and cheese and SpaghettiOs, and we didn't have much. We shopped at thrift stores. All my clothes were on layaway. We just didn't have much. So I saw her go from that to building a life that she wanted to provide for us. And she ended up she went into medical sales. I followed in her footsteps, and she ended up building this extremely successful career in medical sales, where in the 1990s, she was a regional manager for a top 10 pharmaceutical company in the world.
Ah, wow.
So that's where it was modeled for me.
Yeah.
She modeled tenacity and grit and resilience and perseverance. She modeled that all for me. Now, I would say it was nurtured in me because although there was a lot of beautiful aspects about my mom, there was a lot of brokenness between my mom and I's relationship. My mom took me from my father when I was 2.5 years old. So one day my dad showed up at our house and absolutely everything was gone from our house. Wow. And so my mom had some mental illness challenges, and there was a lot of peaks and valleys between our relationship. So I was kicked out at the age of 7. I didn't meet my dad till I was 15. There were some challenges that I was kicked out at 17 years old. So when I was a senior in high school, I was working 40 hours a week, going to high school, and I was living at different friends' houses every 2 weeks so that I can graduate high school. So a lot of the challenges that I went through in my life, whether it be through my upbringing, whether it be through an adult when I overcame postpartum depression, like every challenge that I experienced in my life nurtured resilience in me, nurtured grit in me, because I truly believe that we can either become victim of our circumstances, or we have a choice to look at our circumstances and say, how can I do it differently? What action steps can I take to create a better life for myself? I could have at 17 years old just said, I'm kicked out. I can't do anything about this. Like, my life is over. Or I could be at 17 years old saying, okay, I've been kicked out. I'm going to figure out a way to graduate high school, and I'm going to go to college so that I can provide for myself and so that I don't have to rely on anybody else. So that's where I say it was nurtured in me. And then I do believe there just is an element within me that's just innate, because I've just always been driven. I've been very driven by money, but the reason why is because I believe that money gives me more freedom Money gave me freedom to break away from a toxic relationship with my mom. Money gives me the freedom to, the more money I make, the more money I can give to my community. So that's always been kind of my motivator for a lot of it. And so that's why I say it's been role modeled within me, or it's been role modeled for me. It's been nurtured within me, and it's also been innate within me.
I just wish I could reach through the screen and grab you and just hold you, because you have just summed up what I feel like my podcast for 6 years has been about. Mm-hmm. So thank you. I have a megaphone because of my podcast and where I speak, and I use it every time to tell people these struggles that you're trying so hard to run away from, and that you don't know how you got stuck here, and seeing yourself as poor me, can be the very thing that built what you have now, what I have now. And that we used those struggles, and they were many. I just heard them. And you used every one of them as a stepping stone to build your grit and your resilience. And no matter how many times you were punched down, you took the grit to climb back up one step stronger. And look at you now. You're just glowing. You have a new career. You have 2 twin boys. You have a new book, Unstoppable Grit. You have absolutely used your struggles to turn into growth and victory. No more victim. Wow.
And I want to be transparent too, just because have I created this beautiful life for myself? Yes. But I want to be very transparent. It doesn't mean that I still don't struggle. I still struggle with imposter syndrome. I still struggle with resistance to change, fear of the unknown, perfectionism, self-doubt. I experience all of that. In fact, one of the challenges that I still face today after overcoming postpartum depression was I still get anxiety attacks sometimes. And it's not something that I've had my whole life. It really was a result that started after going through postpartum. And I want to just say, like, just because people hear me now and they're like, oh my gosh, I want to be that confident, or I want to be that strong. I still go through all these challenges. The only difference is I'm able to quickly identify, wow, I'm doubting myself right now. Yeah. Why am I doubting myself? And knowing that I have the tools to overcome it. So in my book, Unstoppable Grit, every chapter is a story, a learning lesson that I've learned from the story, and then practical strategies that people can apply to their life so that they can experience transformation. Because I'm still gonna experience self-doubt in the future, and I know I will. But now I have the tools to overcome it and to quickly identify it and to take these challenges and say, okay, warning sign, I'm experiencing it. What can I do to overcome it? And so I just want to make sure that people really hear that message, that people that you see on stage and they're so confident, they still experience the same doubts that all of us experience at any point. It's just a matter of, do you have the tools to overcome it?
Oh, I just wanted to jump up and just start shouting, yes, because that's the very thing I tell people. I tell people on this podcast that I still experience every single one of those things that you listed. Every one of them. And let me tell you, at age 70, I had anticipated that they would be gone. I thought that at age 70, that they would be all gone from me. But just like you, I still experience them. And just like you, I get to it quicker. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. That's my old friend, fear. I know how to deal with fear. That's my old friend, imposter syndrome. Are you kidding me, Mary? Look what you've done at age 70. What do you mean imposter? You're not an imposter. Stop it. Okay. We all experience those feelings. We are way more alike than we are different. I sense you and I are more alike than most because we've walked that path. And now here we are trying to share with people a way to find that resilience and that grit. All right, Danielle, this is your final question before we end. This podcast is called Crafting a Meaningful Life. So as you look forward to your life ahead, what things would you recommend to yourself and to all of my listeners that are the best piece of advice that you have to offer for how people can craft that life, a meaningful life?
Meaningful life. I believe that stop thinking about what you want to do and start thinking about who you want to be. And when you believe in yourself, other people will believe in you as well. But it starts with believing in yourself first.
That's probably the most beautiful answer to that question that I've ever received on this podcast. So thank you. Yeah. Thank you. At the end of the podcast, listeners, you're going to have Danielle's a link to her book on Amazon. Is it on Amazon?
It's on Amazon.
Yeah. We'll provide that link for you. Also, of course, a link to her website so you can find her, and then her LinkedIn profile as well. Danielle, thank you so much for being with me today. You are absolutely like my hero, because I can just see you're walking the life, that you're finding the light. And I'm so
I see
grateful.
you here. You spoke on, you climbed Kilimanjaro, and I just hold that to the utmost respect. So the feeling is mutual, and thank you so much for having me on the podcast. Right. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And to all of my listeners, we'll look forward to seeing you next time. And in the meantime, remember, every single day, our focus is being our very best self, and that leads the way to crafting your meaningful life. Namaste.
Crafting a Meaningful Life.